The observation dome aboard Outpost Horizon offered Commander Hannah Park an unobstructed view of the horror unfolding on the colony below. Through the curved glass, she watched as 7 hegemony warships, their hulls dark and angular against the blue-green planet, systematically destroyed New Haven settlement. Each blast from their weapons left another smoking crater where homes, schools, and hospitals had stood. Hannah's fingers tightened around the metal railing as she forced herself to keep watching. Her duty was to witness. "Sector 4 is gone," reported Lieutenant Tahoe from his monitoring station. His voice remained professional, but Hannah had known him long enough to hear the tremor beneath his words. "They're moving to the agricultural zones now." A new series of explosions bloomed across the planet's surface. The farming domes, transparent structures that had taken the colonists 15 years to build, shattered like soap bubbles. 30,000 people, Hannah said quietly. They just wanted to grow food and raise their children in peace. The hegemony flagship, twice the size of the others, moved into position above the colony's main administrative center. A single concentrated beam shot downward, and the last major structure on the surface vanished. Lieutenant Tahoe looked up from his console, his face pale. "They're calling it a security measure on official channels. The broadcast is already going out across hegemony space. They're claiming it was a terrorist stronghold harboring anti-hegemony weapons." Hannah's knuckles whitened against the railing. "Make sure we have everything recorded. Every second. Full spectrum analysis. I want radiation readings, atmospheric sampling. Everything. They won't bury this truth." "Yes, Commander." Tahoe returned to his station, fingers flying across the control panel. "Outpost sensors are capturing everything." Hannah turned as the door to the observation dome slid open. Medical Officer Jin Su entered, his face grim. The refugee ships made it out. 17 vessels, approximately 2,000 colonists. They're heading for the backup coordinates as planned. "Only 2,000, Hannah whispered. "Less than 7% of the population." Jin Su stood beside her, watching as the hegemony ships began to depart, their work complete. They didn't even bother with ground troops this time. They don't need to pretend anymore. Hannah pushed away from the railing. They know no one can stop them. The 3 officers stood in silence as the warships jumped to faster-than-light speed, leaving only destruction behind. For nearly 40 years, the galactic hegemony had ruled Earth and its colonies. The hegemony, a coalition of 7 advanced alien species, had arrived just as humanity was taking its first tentative steps into interstellar space. They came with technological gifts and promises of protection in a dangerous galaxy. Those promises had quickly transformed into resource demands, followed by advisors placed in human governments, followed by restrictions on human technological development. Within a decade, Earth was effectively a vassal world, permitted to exist only by providing raw materials and labor to hegemony projects. "Commander, incoming transmission from Earth Central," called the communications officer. "Priority 1. Put it through to my office." Hannah nodded to her officers. "Continue monitoring. I want hourly reports." In her sparse office, Hannah activated the secure viewer. The face of Admiral Yong-Su appeared, the bags under his eyes testifying to sleepless nights. "You witnessed it?" he asked without preamble. "Yes, sir. We recorded everything." Admiral Yong-Su closed his eyes briefly. "New Haven is the 18th colony they've destroyed this year. But this time, they didn't even manufacture an incident first." "They're getting bolder," Hannah agreed. "Or more desperate." "Both." The Admiral leaned forward. "Their representative delivered new demands to the Security Council 3 hours ago. They want our research facilities. All of them." Hannah felt her blood go cold. The last independent human research facilities were hidden in underground bunkers across Earth and Mars. They were the only places where humans could still pursue scientific development without hegemony oversight. "They can't possibly." "They can, and they are." The Admiral cut her off. They want the facilities surrendered within 7 days. Any resistance will be met with appropriate measures. The unspoken threat hung between them. Earth could become like New Haven. What's the Council's response? Official response is pending. The Admiral's expression hardened. Unofficially, we're done bending the knee, Commander Park. Hannah straightened in her chair. Sir, you've been stationed at Outpost Horizon for 3 years. You've documented 17 hegemony atrocities. Your reports have been thorough. I believe in keeping accurate records, sir, and that's why you're still there, despite requests for your reassignment. The Admiral typed something on his end. Check your secondary channel in exactly 6 hours. Use the Sierra November 4 decryption protocol. The screen went black before Hannah could respond. She spent the next 6 hours reviewing the footage from New Haven, cataloging the destruction, and estimating casualties. Her team worked silently, each member processing the horror in their own way. Lieutenant Tahoe muttered quiet prayers for the dead. Jin Su methodically created medical projections of survivor needs. The younger officers moved like sleepwalkers, still shocked by the scale of the destruction. At precisely the 6-hour mark, Hannah locked her office door and activated the hidden terminal beneath her desk. Using the specified decryption protocol, she opened the secure channel. The message was brief. Protocol Prometheus is active. Phase 1 begins at 300 Universal Time. Acknowledge receipt and confirm readiness. Hannah stared at the words. Protocol Prometheus was not an official military contingency. It was something whispered about, a theoretical last resort if humanity ever faced extinction at hegemony hands. Most believed it was just a comforting myth, something to help people sleep at night, knowing there was some plan, some way to fight back. Her fingers hovered over the terminal. To acknowledge would mean committing to whatever came next, likely high treason against the hegemony, probably suicide. She thought of New Haven burning, of 30,000 lives erased, of 40 years of slow strangulation of human potential. Hannah typed her response. Receipt acknowledged. Outpost Horizon ready to execute Phase 1 directives. For Earth. The terminal flashed once, then erased all evidence of the exchange. That night, as Hannah reviewed the deployment schedules for the coming week, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Maybe humanity had a card left to play after all. Admiral Jun-Ho Kim moved through the narrow corridor of Blackstone with practiced ease, his body long accustomed to the asteroid's light gravity. The base had been hollowed out 23 years ago, when the first whispers of resistance began. What started as a mining operation became humanity's last hidden fortress, a place unknown to hegemony star charts and patrol routes. The meeting chamber ahead was filled with the low murmur of voices. Jun-Ho paused at the entrance, taking in the sight of 43 humans from every corner of human-controlled space. Some he recognized immediately. General Mai from the Mars Defense Force, Director Yun-Ji of the Titan Science Division, Captain Ho-Jin of the stealth carrier Shadow Dancer. Others were new faces, resistance leaders who had risked everything to answer the call when Protocol Prometheus activated. Admiral on deck, announced his aide, and a room fell silent. Jun-Ho walked to the central table. Thank you all for coming. I know the journey was dangerous. Less dangerous than staying put, said a woman with burned scars across her face. The hegemony just seized the Europa research station, killed everyone who resisted. Murmurs of anger rippled through the room. Jun-Ho raised his hand for silence. What happened at Europa is exactly why we're here. For 40 years, we've endured the hegemony's control. For 20 of those years, we've been planning. Today, we implement that plan. He activated the holographic display in the center of the table. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, with 50 star systems highlighted in red. Each of these systems contains critical hegemony infrastructure: command centers, shipyards, communication hubs, supply depots. Together, they formed the backbone of their control network. The assembled leaders studied the map with intense focus. A thin man with glasses stepped forward, his lab coat marking him as one of the scientists. For those who don't know me, I'm Professor Sunmi Lee. I've led the Prometheus project for the past 11 years. She tapped commands into the display, and the image changed to show a small spherical device. This is the Prometheus device. On the surface, it appears to be a standard solar monitoring probe, the kind the hegemony allows us to use for basic stellar research. She rotated the image, revealing the internal components. Inside, however, is something very different. Each device contains technology capable of triggering a controlled micronova in a star, a precisely calculated energy burst that will temporarily disable all hegemony technology within the system without causing permanent damage to inhabited planets. A colonel from the back of the room spoke up. "You're saying we can knock out their tech without killing civilians?" "Exactly," Sunmi nodded. "The pulse will disrupt their neural interfaces, weapon systems, and communication networks for approximately 6 hours. Their technology is vulnerable to this specific frequency in ways ours is not, a weakness we discovered 15 years ago, but kept hidden." She looked around the room. "Once deployed, we'll have approximately 72 hours before the hegemony might detect the pattern of probe placements." Admiral Junho stepped forward again, "Which is why we move in 60 hours, not a minute later." "How do we get past their patrols?" asked a captain from the Europa Resistance. "The shipping lanes are watched constantly." Colonel Du Yun stood, his tall frame commanding attention. His left arm ended at the elbow, a reminder of a hegemony peacekeeping operation 5 years earlier. "My division has been positioning resources for this moment for 3 years," he said. "We have ships in place near the Arcturus Junction. When we give the signal, they'll engage in what will appear to be a large-scale smuggling operation gone wrong. The resulting chase will draw hegemony patrols away from our deployment vectors." He activated his own section of the map, showing ship positions. "We've calculated patrol response times and hegemony command protocols. The diversion will create a 60-hour window during which our stealth ships can place the devices near each target star." "And if the diversion fails?" someone asked. Du Yun's face hardened. "Then those ships and their crews sacrifice themselves to ensure the mission continues. Every person involved knows the stakes." A heavy silence fell over the room. Junho let it linger for a moment before speaking again. "For 2 decades, while pretending compliance, humanity has studied the hegemony. Every technology they use, every biological weakness of the 7 species, every strategic blind spot in their command structure." He walked around the table, making eye contact with each person. "Their arrogance has been their greatest vulnerability. They see us as primitive, barely worth monitoring. They've grown complacent in their power. They never imagined their human subjects could truly threaten them." Junho stopped at the holographic display and expanded the view to show the galaxy. "We get one chance. If we succeed, we create an opportunity to rewrite humanity's future. If we fail..." He didn't need to finish the thought. The next hours passed in detailed briefings. Ship assignments were confirmed, communication protocols established, contingency plans reviewed. The Resistance had prepared for this moment for years, but theory was becoming reality, and the weight of it pressed on everyone. In a quiet moment between meetings, Junho found himself standing next to Professor Sunmi in the observation dome, looking out at the star field. "Will it work?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. Sunlight didn't look away from the stars. "The science is sound. The devices are tested, but 50 simultaneous deployments, coordinated across that much space." She sighed. "It has to work, Admiral. We have nothing else." Later, as the stealth ships prepared for departure, Junho visited each launch bay. He spoke quietly with the crews, memorizing their faces. Some would not return. That was the simple reality of what they were attempting. The smallest ships would leave first, single-pilot vessels designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort. They would carry the Prometheus devices to the farthest targets. Pilot Jun Seo saluted as Junho approached his ship. Admiral. At ease, Lieutenant. Your target is Proxima Centauri. Yes, sir. Estimated deployment time is 59 hours from launch. Jun-ho nodded. Cutting it close. We'll make it, sir. Jun-seo's confidence didn't fully mask his fear, but his determination was genuine. I know you will. Jun-ho clasped the young man's shoulder. History won't record your name, Lieutenant. None of our names. But what we do in the next 60 hours will echo through human generations to come. Jun-seo straightened. It's been an honor, sir. One by one, the stealth ships slipped away from Blackstone. Their departures staggered to avoid detection. Each carried a Prometheus device toward one of 50 carefully selected star systems. In his private quarters, after the last ship had departed, Jun-ho recorded a message for his wife on Mars Colony. Their communication had been limited for security reasons, but he couldn't begin this mission without saying goodbye. Just in case. He stared at the camera, choosing his words carefully. They needed to seem innocent to any hegemony sensor, but meaningful to her. Remember the sunset we watched at Olympus Mons? He said finally. We'll see another one soon. He ended the transmission and sat in silence. In 60 hours, the galaxy would change forever. Whether humanity would survive that change remained to be seen. Lieutenant Ji-woo Nam held her breath as the Prometheus device activated. Her stealth cruiser, the Swift Justice, maintained position just beyond the orbit of Proxima Centauri's outermost planet. Through the main viewport, she watched the red dwarf star flicker, a subtle disturbance that would have been impossible to detect without knowing exactly what to look for. Energy spike confirmed, reported Ensign Subin from the science station. The pulse is propagating through the system at expected velocity. Jae-woo nodded, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Dozens of hegemony ships appeared as red markers in orbit around the system's habitable world. One by one, the markers began to fade. Their systems are going offline, said Tactical Officer Minho. His voice was steady, but Ji-woo could hear the underlying excitement. Main defense grid, orbital platforms, planetary shields, all dark. What about their backup systems? Ji-woo asked. Exactly as Professor Sunmai predicted, Minho replied. Their biological neural interfaces are disrupted. They can't even access manual overrides. Ji-woo allowed herself one moment to absorb what was happening. For her entire life, the hegemony had seemed all-powerful. Their technology was centuries beyond human capabilities. Their 7 species controlled thousands of worlds across the galaxy. They had crushed every attempt at resistance with overwhelming force. Yet now, with a single carefully designed pulse, they were helpless. Strike teams, prepare for deployment, she ordered, pushing aside her wonder. You have 18 minutes from mark. Hit your targets and withdraw according to protocol. On the lower decks, 4 assault shuttles powered up. Each carried a team of 15 soldiers equipped with specially shielded gear. Technology developed in secret labs on Earth and tested in the shadows of abandoned moons. Team leaders, final confirmation. Ji-woo called. Team Alpha, ready. Captain Gayen's voice was crisp. Team Beta, ready. Major Sang-hoon sounded almost eager. Team Delta, ready. Lieutenant Kita was as calm as ever. Team Omega, ready. Ji-woo recognized Commander Youngmi's voice, the woman who had trained her at the academy before disappearing into the resistance. Launch when ready. Good hunting. Ji-woo watched as the shuttles departed the Swift Justice, their stealth systems making them nearly invisible against the black of space. Her own team would target the Proxima Command Center, the hegemony's primary communications hub for this sector. Without it, hegemony forces in 27 star systems would be unable to coordinate a response to what was happening. Lieutenant, called Ensign Subin. I'm detecting similar energy patterns from neighboring systems. Barnard Star, Wolf 359, Lilan 21,185. They're all experiencing identical stellar fluctuations. Jae-woo nodded. The other Prometheus devices are activating as scheduled. Across 50 carefully selected star systems, human strike forces were preparing for the synchronized attack that would cripple the hegemony's command structure in a single decisive blow. 30 minutes later, Ji Woo led her strike team through the airlock of the Proxima Command Center. The facility was built into a massive asteroid in stable orbit around the star. Under normal circumstances, it would be protected by layers of security fields, automated defense systems, and hundreds of hegemony guards. Now, its corridors were dim, lit only by emergency chemical lights that cast eerie blue shadows. The occasional hegemony officer stumbled through the darkness, their movements uncoordinated and confused. The 7 species of the hegemony had long ago integrated technology into their bodies. Neural implants connected them to their systems and to each other. With those connections severed by the Prometheus pulse, they were like addicts in sudden withdrawal, disoriented and barely functional. Remember, no unnecessary casualties. Ji Woo reminded her team over the secure comm. We target the hardware and command personnel only. Understood, Lieutenant, replied Sergeant Won-shik beside her. Though after what they did to New Haven. I know, Ji Woo said quietly. But we're not them. They moved quickly through the station, encountering minimal resistance. Most of the aliens simply raised their hands and surrender when confronted with armed humans. Some tried to fight with handheld weapons, but their coordination was so compromised that they posed little threat. Ji Woo's team reached the central control room 17 minutes after boarding. Inside, a dozen high-ranking hegemony officers from various species were attempting to restore power to the main systems. Step away from the consoles, Ji Woo ordered, her weapon raised. This facility is now under human control. A tall Narsi, one of the founding species of the hegemony, turned toward her. Unlike the others, he seemed relatively composed despite the technology disruption. You cannot hope to hold this station, he said, his translator device sputtering but functional. When communications are restored, the full might of the hegemony will descend upon you. Communications won't be restored, Ji Woo replied calmly. Not here or in 50 other command centers across hegemony space. For the first time, she saw fear in the alien's 4 eyes. What have you done? Ji Woo didn't answer. Instead, she directed her team to secure the room and begin the next phase of their mission. Technical specialists moved to each console, inserting devices that would permanently corrupt the hegemony's command protocols. Lieutenant, we're receiving updates from the other strike teams, reported Corporal Yunji. Alpha and Beta had secured their targets. Delta is reporting heavy resistance, but still on schedule. Ji Woo nodded. And the other systems? Coming in now. Yunji's eyes widened as she read the incoming data. Lieutenant, it's working. Reports from Molth 359, Laland, Ta City, all primary targets secured. The hegemony's regional command structure is collapsing. A cheer started to rise from the team, but Ji Woo silenced it with a raised hand. We're not done yet. Complete the uploads and prepare for extraction. We have 9 minutes before the shuttles return. As her team worked, Ji Woo walked to the main observation window. From here, she could see the curve of Proxima Centauri, the habitable world where thousands of hegemony officials lived in luxury while human colonies struggled under crushing restrictions. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future where humans walk those streets as equals, not servants. Lieutenant, we have a problem. Sergeant Won-shik called. The main data core is isolated from the network. We need direct access to complete the upload. Ji Woo joined him at a sealed door marked with hegemony warning symbols. Can we breach it? Yes, but it's going to take precious time. And once we're inside... He hesitated. The room is naturally shielded. Our protection against the Prometheus pulse won't last in there. We'll lose communications with the team. Ji Woo checked her timer. 7 minutes until extraction. I'll go. Lieutenant, that's an order. Prepare the breach. 3 minutes later, Ji-Woo stood alone in the data core, the beating heart of the hegemony's communication network for this sector. Her protective gear was already beginning to fail, the displays flickering as the room's natural shielding allowed the lingering effects of the Prometheus pulse to penetrate. Working quickly, she connected the upload device to the main terminal. Lines of code scrolled across the screen as the virus planted itself deep in the hegemony systems. This was perhaps the most crucial part of the mission, not just disabling communications now, but ensuring they couldn't be quickly restored. As the upload reached 90%, Ji-Woo's comms sputtered back to life. Tenant Nam. Extract now. Hegemony reinforcements inbound. She checked the display. 98%. 99. Upload complete, she whispered, disconnecting the device. Mission accomplished. Across 50 star systems, as the hegemony's leaders struggled to understand what was happening, humanity delivered its message. The days of submission were over. Director Hyunwoo walked through the massive doors of the Hegemony Council chamber with his heart pounding against his ribs. No human had ever been permitted to enter this sacred space in the 5 centuries since the hegemony established its capital on this artificial world at the galaxy's center. The chamber was designed to intimidate, a perfect circle 200 meters across, with a domed ceiling that displayed the real-time movements of the hegemony's 10,000 controlled star systems. Right now, 50 of those stars pulsed an angry red. 4 human security officers flanked Hyunwoo. They wore simple gray uniforms without weapons, a calculated show of confidence. 2 days ago, these same officers had participated in the coordinated strike against the hegemony's command centers. Now they walked with straight backs and steady eyes into the heart of enemy territory. The 7 high counselors waited at the central table. Each represented one of the founding species of the hegemony, beings who had ruled the galaxy with unquestioned authority for millennia. Their physical forms varied dramatically. The insectoid Dorvan, with their chitinous exoskeletons, the gaseous myth contained in ornate environmental suits, the reptilian Osric with their jeweled scales, and 4 others equally alien to human eyes. You have been summoned to explain your species' acts of war, intoned the myth counselor, voice modulated through translation devices. Speak quickly. Hyunwoo stopped at the edge of the table. The room's lighting highlighted the deep lines on his face, earned through decades of working in the resistance. At 67, he was considered young for such an important diplomatic role by hegemony standards, where political figures often lived for centuries. This, too, was a deliberate choice, to show that humans valued ability over age. I come not to explain, but to negotiate, Hyunwoo replied, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. The situation has changed. The balance of power has shifted. You cannot possibly maintain this assault, the Dorvan counselor rasped, mandibles clicking in agitation. Your strikes were effectively coordinated, but your species lacks the numbers and technology for sustained conflict. You will be extinct within a cycle. Hyunwoo allowed a small smile to touch his lips. He placed a small silver device, no larger than his palm, on the center of the council table. With a simple touch, it activated, projecting a detailed galactic map into the air above the table. Hundreds of stars were highlighted in pulsing red, far more than the 50 they had already affected. Each of these systems contains a Prometheus device, he said calmly. We've spent 40 years mapping every critical infrastructure node in your empire. We know exactly where to hit to ensure your civilization crumbles completely. The chamber erupted in outrage. The Osric counselor rose to his full 3-meter height, scales flaring in a threat display. The Dorvan's translator couldn't keep up with the rapid clicking of her mandibles. The myth's containment suit darkened as the gaseous being inside churned with emotion. This is blackmail, the Tursus counselor shouted, her 4 arms gesturing wildly. You cannot hold the entire galaxy hostage. Yet you have held thousands of species hostage for millennia. Hyunwoo countered. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the counselor's agitation. The difference is that we don't seek to rule. We seek to free. One of the counselors had remained silent during the outburst. Now the Tellurian representative stood slowly. Unlike the others, the Tellurians were physically similar to humans, bipedal mammals with 2 arms and a single head. Their silvery skin and 6-fingered hands marked them as alien, but their expressions were readable to human eyes. And right now, the Tellurian counselor looked afraid. "We have confirmed their claims," the Tellurian announced, voice cutting through the remaining protests. "My science division completed analysis of the affected systems 1 hour ago. The human devices are capable of precisely what Director Hyunwoo claims. Moreover, our deep space monitoring stations have detected similar devices in at least 20 additional systems, placed there without our knowledge." The chamber fell silent. "The humans have positioned themselves to bring down our entire power structure with a single command," continued the Tellurian. "I move that we hear their terms." Hyunwoo nodded in appreciation toward the Tellurian. It was no coincidence that the Tellurians had been the first to confirm humanity's capabilities. Their species had also suffered under hegemony rule despite their council seat. Relegated to second-class status, their colonies restricted, their resources exploited. "Let me be clear," Hyunwoo said, addressing all 7 counselors. "This was never about revenge. This is about freedom, not just for humans, but for every species the hegemony has subjugated." He touched the device again, and the display changed to show a document. "These are our terms. They are non-negotiable." The Myth Counselor's suit vented excess gas, their equivalent of a sigh. "Proceed. First, immediate independence for Earth and all human colonies. Second, reparations for 40 years of resource theft and destruction of human settlements. Third, and most importantly, the dissolution of the current hegemony power structure and the establishment of a new galactic concordat, where all spacefaring species have equal representation." "Impossible," the Osric counselor hissed. "You would undo 5,000 years of galactic order." 5,000 years of galactic tyranny," Hyunwoo corrected. "Your 7 species have ruled through fear and technology suppression. You've kept potentially rival species from developing by restricting their research, controlling their resources, and destroying any who showed too much promise." He looked directly at each counselor in turn. "We know about the Ascendant Protocol. We found the records." A chill seemed to pass through the chamber. Even the Tellurian looked shocked. The Ascendant Protocol was the hegemony's darkest secret, a systematic program to identify and eliminate any species that showed signs of developing technology that might threaten hegemony control. 27 species had been completely eradicated over the millennia, their home worlds sterilized, their colonies abandoned, their very existence erased from galactic records. Humanity had been next on that list. "How did you?" began the Tursus counselor, but the Dwarven cut her off with a sharp clicking sound. "You understand nothing of galactic stability," the Dwarven said. "Without the hegemony's guidance, the galaxy would descend into chaos and war." Hyunwoo smiled thinly. "Perhaps, or perhaps species free to develop naturally might create a more just order than one built on fear and suppression." He gestured to his security team. One of them stepped forward, carrying the sealed case. Inside was a data core, a physical record that couldn't be altered or deleted. "This contains evidence of every hegemony violation of its own stated principles over the past 5 centuries. Every species eliminated under the Ascendant Protocol. Every colony destroyed for security reasons. Every technology suppressed to maintain your advantage." Hyunwoo placed the case beside the projection device. "We've already transmitted copies to every known spacefaring civilization. If anything happens to us, if you reject our terms, this information goes public, followed by the activation of every remaining Prometheus device." The council chamber fell silent again. The 7 most powerful beings in the galaxy stared at the human before them, their expressions ranging from rage to fear to calculating interest. Finally, the Tellurian spoke again. "How do we know you won't simply take control yourselves? Become the new tyrants?" Hyunwoo's expression softened slightly. A fair question. That's why our third term specifies equal representation for all spacefaring species, including your seven. We don't want a rule. We want a galaxy where no one rules over others. He touched the projection device one more time, and the image changed to show Earth, blue and green and beautiful. 40 years ago, we were a young species taking our first steps into the stars. You saw our potential and decided to control us rather than welcome us. Today, we offer the galaxy a different path forward. The Myth Counselor's suit rippled as the gaseous being inside shifted position. And if we refuse? Hyunwoo's face hardened. Then 50 more systems go dark tomorrow. And 50 more the day after that. We've hidden Prometheus devices throughout your territory for 20 years. You'll never find them all before we can activate them. He let those words sink in before continuing more softly. But that's not what we want. We want peace, just not peace built on subjugation. The seven counselors looked at each other, communicating in ways human senses couldn't perceive. After what seemed like an eternity, the Dwarven counselor's mandibles clicked in what might have been resignation. We will consider your terms. Hyunwoo bowed slightly. The people of Earth await your answer. You have 24 hours. As he turned to leave the chamber with his security team, he caught the eye of the Tellurian counselor. Something passed between them, a moment of understanding between two beings whose species had suffered under the weight of empire. The day of reckoning had come, not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. Commander Hannah Park stood by the tall windows of the rebuilt United Nations headquarters in New Geneva, watching delegates from across the galaxy enter the Grand Chamber. The morning sun reflected off the crystalline dome overhead, casting rainbow patterns across the marble floors. 1 year had passed since the day humanity changed the course of galactic history. 1 year since the hegemony fell. The chamber below was filling with representatives from over 300 formerly subjugated species. Some walked on legs, others floated on anti-gravity platforms, and still others moved in environmental suits that maintained the specific conditions they needed to survive. Another 700 species were attending virtually, their faces appearing on screens that lined the walls. "Hard to believe this is real," said Admiral Junho as he joined her at the window. His uniform was new, bearing the insignia of the Terran Defense Force rather than the resistance symbol he had worn for so many years. Hana nodded. "I keep expecting to wake up back on Outpost Horizon, watching another colony burn." The delegates took their seats as Director Hyunwoo approached the central podium. His hair had grown whiter in the past year, the burden of leading humanity's transition from resistance to government etching new lines on his face. Yet there was an energy to his movements that hadn't been there before, a sense of purpose fulfilled. "Representatives of the galaxy," Hyunwoo began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Today we sign the Galactic Concordat, a new beginning for all our peoples." The document had taken months to negotiate. Even with the hegemony defeated, centuries of distrust between species couldn't be erased overnight. There had been times when it seemed the entire effort might collapse under the weight of ancient grievances and competing interests. But today, it would become reality. "The Concordat establishes a new order," Hyunwoo continued, "one where no single species or coalition can dominate others, where technological and cultural exchange will be truly mutual, where military force can only be deployed with broad consensus." Hannah watched as delegates from the former hegemony species took their positions. They no longer commanded special status or authority, but sat as equals among the races they had once ruled. The Dwarven representatives' mandibles clicked nervously. The Myth's containment suit swirled with uneasy colors. Only the Tellurians seemed truly at peace with the new arrangement. "Some have called it an impossible dream," Hyunwoo said. "But we've already proven that the impossible is merely difficult when people of good will work together." Outside the chamber, beyond the protected grounds of the United Nations complex, New Geneva was a city transformed. Alien architecture blended with human designs as embassies and cultural centers rose from the rubble of the brief but devastating battle that had been fought here during the final days of the conflict. Humans walked the streets alongside visitors from 100 worlds, learning to communicate, to trade, to live together. Similar scenes were playing out across Earth and throughout human space. After generations of isolation imposed by the hegemony, humanity was finally taking its place among the galactic community. Not everyone was happy with the new order. There had been violence, terrorist attacks by human extremists who wanted to seize the moment to establish human dominance, and by former hegemony loyalists who couldn't accept their loss of power. But such incidents had grown less frequent as the benefits of peace became evident. Some called it the Day of Darkness, Hannah said to Admiral Junho as they watched the proceedings. But I prefer to think of it as the day the light came back. Junho's expression grew somber. Was it worth it? He asked quietly. Hannah knew what he was asking. The human resistance had won, but at terrible cost. Millions had died in the final conflict, both humans and aliens caught in the crossfire. Entire settlements had been lost. Wounds both physical and psychological would take generations to heal. She thought of the billions who had lived under oppression, the millions who had died resisting it, and the trillions across the galaxy who would now know freedom. History will decide, she answered. But I believe it was. Below, the signing ceremony had begun. One by one, representatives approached the central table to place their mark on the document, some using hands, some tentacles, some specialized appendages with no human equivalent. Each signature brought a ripple of applause from the assembled delegates. In a private chamber nearby, Director Hyunwoo met with the now disbanded Prometheus team. The dozen scientists and engineers who had created the technology that made humanity's victory possible gathered around a conference table for what would likely be their final official meeting. Professor Sunmi's hands trembled slightly as she placed a small clear crystal on the table. Inside, tiny lights pulsed with stored information. The last of the schematics, she said. All other copies have been destroyed as agreed. The Prometheus device had changed the course of galactic history. Its ability to temporarily disable the hegemony technology had given humanity the edge it needed to win freedom. But such power came with terrible responsibility. What shall we do with it? Sunmi asked, though everyone present knew the answer. The decision had been made months ago, after long debate. Hyunwoo took the crystal and placed it in a security container. The lock engaged with a soft click, sealing away knowledge that could save or destroy civilizations. We keep it safe, he said, not to use, but to remember that even the smallest species in the galaxy can change the course of history when pushed too far. He looked around at the assembled team. And to ensure that if some future power attempts to do to others what was done to us, we have the means to stop them. After the meeting, Hyunwoo walked alone through the gardens behind the United Nations complex. The space had been designed to accommodate visitors from many worlds, with sections mimicking various planetary environments. He passed through a misty area created for amphibious species, then a low-gravity zone where delicate floating plants thrived. He paused at the border of a desert garden, watching a group of school children, human and alien together, listening to a teacher explain Earth cacti to fascinated non-human youngsters. Lieutenant Ji Woo-nam found him there, her uniform bearing the new insignia of the Diplomatic Security Corps. The final hegemony outpost surrendered this morning, she reported. Altair system is now under Concordat administration. Hyunwoo nodded. And the remaining Prometheus devices? Deactivated, as ordered. Technical teams are retrieving them for secure storage. Good. He watched the children a moment longer. Did you ever imagine this, Lieutenant, when you were on that ship watching Proxima Centauri flicker? Jai-woo shook her head. I just wanted to live free, to not watch another colony burn. This. She gestured at the peaceful garden, the mixed group of species. This is more than I dared hope for. Outside the complex, a new embassy row was under construction, one where the human embassy stood equal in size and position to all others. No longer were the powerful elevated above the rest. No longer were some species deemed more worthy than others. Above the main entrance to the Concordat headquarters, workers were installing a simple inscription in multiple languages. The words, chosen after much debate, carried a message for any who might read it in the centuries to come. Never again will any beings be masters over others. The stars belong to all of us. As evening fell, lights came on across New Geneva. Human cities had once dimmed their lights at night to avoid hegemony attention. Now they shone brightly, visible from orbit, a beacon in the darkness, a symbol of a galaxy awakening to a new dawn. The end